Geology. Geology. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist. This is Mini Geology Radio Show from KPFT HD2 channel in the beautiful Montrose, headquarters of KPFT Houston. Yes, so today we are gonna talk about libraries, about all of those beautiful products, let's say, that are inside those walls that we call libraries. Even though the libraries now can be digital. We'll see. We will talk today with a librarian. We're gonna talk with Linda Musser. Linda is the head of the Earth and Mineral Sciences Library at the PennState University. Hi Linda, are you with us?
Yes, hello.
Hi Linda, welcome very much to Mini Geology Radio Show. I'm very glad to have you online. You are calling from Pennsylvania?
I am Daniel.
All right. So, we have guests from all over the world. I'm very happy to host you here at Mini Geology, where we talk about the relationships between our beloved discipline, geology, or how they call it now, earth sciences, and the wonders and the beautiful wonders of life related to geology, the daily relationship that we have with the earth sciences. And I would like to talk with you today about the libraries. What's going on with the libraries, especially those ones related with earth sciences? I hope and I guess that you see many books about geology, and you probably read their titles. Let me ask you off the bat, what are the geologists writing about in these last years?
Oh, geologists continue to write about the traditional topics they have always written about. Additionally, they've just added many new fields of study. The earth sciences have become, like so many other fields, more computational. So there's added information and specialties related to analysis of data, seismology, remote-sensed images. New technologies are a big area of growth as well. The use of LIDAR and other technology to monitor earthquakes, the use of the Twitter feeds to report seismic activity. So there's quite a bit going on in terms of publications and areas of interest. So the areas and fields that geologists are exploring has continued to grow. I think that's perhaps something that people don't think about too much, is that lots of the old things don't go away. Things just continue to grow. It's like radio. Television did not kill radio. We just have more media.
I see. So, and do you think that geologists right now, are they more generalists, or because of these many other new disciplines related to geology, they become more specialists in the publications that you see in your library?
I do tend to see a lot more specialization. I think it's a challenge for many disciplines, not just the earth sciences, for a person to stay completely up to date on every aspect of their discipline, because each discipline has become so broad. There's the field work and the computational work and all the subspecialties of lithostratigraphy and sequence stratigraphy and fossil work and so many different things, DNA work on the paleo side. So I think we do tend to see more specialized works. I'm heartened to see that the popularized work is still there. So it's an interesting time. It's always interesting. Things are always changing, but I think you do see more specialized works than general.
I see. And have you seen in, let's say, your customers a change in their behavior on the kind of books or products that they request? And you have been working quite a lot in the library, so you probably have seen a change, if a change has occurred?
There has been radical change, not just in the kinds of resources that people are asking for, but just in the publishing of research in general. The Internet has had a huge impact on all our lives, and the same is true for libraries. Publishers continue to publish books, but it became much easier for organizations to publish the results of their research via web pages. It became a lot easier simply to publish. It used to be a very long, drawn-out process to create page proofs and insert photos. It was very much a true literal cut and paste operation. And now anyone can publish. You can print with a press of a button. You can take it to your local Kinko's or No One's or whatever kind of copy center you might have and get something bound quite easily. So it's really changed a lot. The biggest change, perhaps, so the kinds of resources people are using, we're still using books. Our students and researchers are still using journal articles. They're still using technical reports and other kinds of field notes. But I think what's changed is that the Internet has made the average researcher has become more efficient, and it's made it easier for them to access information. So I think less time is spent seeking out basic data. What used to be difficult has become easy. There's still challenges in terms of finding information, but it's become a lot easier from your phone, from your desktop computer, from your tablet. You can get all kinds of things answered.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. I would like to go back to the basics now. First of all, asking what kind of librarian are you, and what many other kinds of librarians exist?
Well, the easy answer is that I'm a very good librarian.
Of course, that's why you are here
seriously,
in geology.
The librarianship has changed a lot as well. It's like any other profession. If I had to define it, I would say I'm an academic librarian, somewhat of a traditional style. I do a bit of everything. My job at the university is to stay familiar and cognizant of all the happenings within the disciplines that I support. So I have to keep up on the latest fields, whether it's nanotechnology or remote sensing technology or geospatial technologies, in order to assist the researchers and students that I serve in order to select the proper materials to have available to them. Part of my job is to do the traditional things librarians do, as in answer questions. So if someone comes to me with a particular question, part of my job is to assist them in finding the information they need to answer that question. As a academic librarian, I am a faculty member, and it's part of my job to increase the knowledge in the fields of information science and librarianship. So part of my role is to teach and to do research as well. There are many new kinds of librarians, however. As I said, my type of job is sort of the old traditional librarian does many things within a certain subject area. But increasingly what we're seeing with interdisciplinarity growing and with the challenges of new technology, like in geology, we have folks getting more specialized and doing more specialized things. We're seeing the same in librarianship. We have librarians whose jobs revolve around patents. We have folks who are dealing with copyrights and intellectual property. We have those who are dealing with online education. So it's become quite interesting time for us, and we did go through a period, I think, in the 70s and 80s where things were sort of the way they'd always been, and radical change has hit librarianship as well.
I see. And what about the people that they come to you? I see you have a holistic view of the entire system behind a library. And what about the people that come to you? How do you call them? The customers?
Users, the old-fashioned word is patrons, but many of them, if I know them, and I do know many of them, they're just students or my clientele. But I think the most common term is users.
So what kind of users do you see or have you seen in your experience?
Students, since I'm in an academic library, I'd have to say students are our number one. They're our reason for being, and they're the folks that I interact with the most. I also interact a lot with faculty, both in terms of their research interests and their teaching, in terms of helping them find textbooks, for example, have become very expensive in a lot of fields, and there's a big push for open educational resources and trying to find video clips to help illustrate particular formations. I know one of our geosciences class this year, because of some construction in our area, the place they normally went out and did some field work and look at a particular formation was inaccessible. So we set up some virtual reality opportunities so students could come in and actually feel like they were exploring out in the field, but they were actually in our VR center. Beyond that, I think we do a fair amount of assistance to business and industry, local and worldwide. Our collections are such that a lot of academic libraries support researchers around the globe, both in academia and in industry. But I guess perhaps the ones that I actually interact with the most, the clientele, would be the public. We are a land-grant university at Penn State, and like a lot of other libraries and librarians, we're open access. If people can walk in our door, use our resources, and they have access to me in terms of if they want to ask a question, my job is to help them find answers. So I guess I would say my third clientele, the biggest one, would be the general public.
And talking about the students, and we have students listening, what are they looking for in how their research has changed when they enter the library?
Many of the students now come to us having done some preliminary research on the internet using just the free search engines like the Google or Bing or something like that. So they have some sense of the information. They come to me when the questions are really difficult, when they can't find the information that they seek, when they're trying to determine whether a piece of data or physical property has been measured in the past and they're searching on the open internet just does not turn it up. We find that many of our students are unaware of the specialized resources that have long existed within the research community. That is one of the sort of interesting things about the internet. It's made so much information easily available that many of our students don't realize that there are other kinds of sources that they need to come through the library or talk to a librarian to just realize that there are other things out there besides just the internet. Many of them come to us with, they have a particular thing that they know exists, a faculty member, their teacher, or someone they're working with that says, go look at this document, and they have trouble tracking that down. We do a lot of assistance to students because they can't find it necessarily either online or they can't find it within our collection. And libraries spend a lot of time aiding students in acquiring or getting access to information that's perhaps only held in Mexico or only held in New Zealand. So we facilitate access. That's one of the roles that we play.
I see. So it seems that users, they are a little bit more knowledgeable nowadays because they know a little bit what they are looking for, and they generally do previous research. I remember sometimes going to the library and asking for a certain author writing a book, which I don't really remember the title, and absolutely I don't know when it was written. Something like that. Right.
I think librarians like to joke that all the easy questions have gone away because with the internet, those are the kinds of things that maybe you could sort out now. So what we have as librarians tend to be the more challenging research-oriented questions. I will say that we sometimes rue the fact that students have such easy access to information because it makes them think that when they're searching Google, for example, they think they're seeing everything. And, of course, as professionals, we know that there's only a small percentage, well, it's not small, but there's a significant percentage of things that they are missing if that's the only place they search.
So let's talk a little bit more about this. I'm intrigued about this thing that you say, because we all go to the searching engines to look for information. You as a librarian, how do you see this behavior? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the consequences on this?
One of the things that we do endeavor to teach students as they are going through their academic studies is that they need to be aware of the sources of information, or the quality of the information, and that searching in just one place is usually not a great thing. If you're just after what time does the movie begin or a great restaurant review, it might be fine. But when they're doing research for their job or they're working on their thesis or their dissertation, they need to look in multiple places because no one place has it all. So that's one of the challenges that one of the goals of librarians is to make sure that our students graduate with the knowledge that sometimes you have to look in a few different places. Or another thing, I'm sorry, I just lost track of what was the other aspect of your question.
We were talking about the searching engines like Google or Bing, and I was asking what are the pros and the cons of doing the research in these engines, because it seems that Google is the place where everything is there.
The pros of using the search engines is that they are so convenient. They're from every device. They're seemingly always available. They appear at least to be fairly comprehensive in terms of when someone's searching for something, and they're smart. Well, not all of them. Some are smarter than others. Very sophisticated algorithms behind these computers, so you don't have to think. In the past, when you were searching for information, you had to think about what are the terms that the author might have used. Would it be geosciences or would it be geology? Would it be earth sciences? Those kinds of things. Nowadays, we've got these smart computer algorithms. Google is very good at that, and it makes searching easier because the computer algorithms help organize and pull together things so it takes some of that work away. The danger, I guess, the con for using the search tools is that it can lull you into a false sense that you're getting everything. So in some situations where you just need a fact or you just need a quick explanation of what is something like LIDAR, what does that stand for, it's perfectly fine. And many librarians, we all use the search engines every day. I think the challenge that we have where there's that gap is where there are other tools that sometimes do some kinds of searching better. There are tools that some of the search engines, they don't tell us how they prioritize the results. So are you missing something important because you're relying on just that one thing? So we love the search engines. We love Google. It makes our lives a lot easier. But because they do give a false sense that people are searching everything, the entire literature, that's a problem. And I can give you a good example of this. This problem is starting to lessen. But when the search engines first came out, a couple decades back, they were relying on the materials that they could get on the Internet. So they would go to a publisher's site and they would get all the journal articles and they would get the title information, so on and so forth. But there wasn't a whole lot of older material that was available digitally. And so if you search you could actually see it in students' work sometimes in their research papers, that you could see that they only used a search engine because all their references would stop with like 1980, as if there was no literature, no research that had ever been done prior to that date. So you could see that there was a reliance on the convenience and the easy access to the search engines then. Things have improved now because librarians and others have been working really hard to digitize the older literature. So we have easy access to things now from the 1700s, from the 1800s, and that has also helped improve the results. the usefulness of search tools like Google.
I see. So very important to highlight this aspect of not reinventing the wheel because we don't have access to the old literature, because we are lazy, we don't go to a physical place to look for those special books or maps or literature in general. But now I understand that because of your work of librarians and other professions similar to yours, this thing is changing, and therefore we can still rely on these search engines because now they incorporate also these older literature. Is that correct?
Yes. And I should give credit where credit's due. One of the great things about search engines like Bing and Yahoo and Google is that they're free. And that should not be overlooked. Many of the specialized tools that I mentioned that help aid research and researchers in finding information, those cost money. And so that does limit access because you see this great tool, but if you don't have the money to be able to get access to it, that's a problem. So I think one of the other consequences of having search engines like Google and Bing is that it's made access to information more equitable.
Talking about budgets and money, who is paying for the conservation of libraries? Who is interested and passionate to keep them open in a moment where people, they can maybe argue that we don't need them anymore?
Well, I think different constituents get different things from libraries. And of course it depends on the type of library. In the United States, public libraries are seen as a public good, and there's a lot of folks who are very passionate about that. And public librarians have, they're largely committed to outreach to their communities and to literacy for children in the schools and communities. In academia, there have been raging debates over the years because it is an expensive proposition. Not so much the cost of the library itself, but the cost of the library resources. So I spend a lot of time, and there have been many studies that show the return on investment and the value that having, professional librarians can bring because it frees up time from other folks who have to try and do what we do. But I think the value to the faculty, the teaching faculty, the research faculty that libraries bring is that we make sure that materials are easily available to them. Faculty, too, encounter problems in obtaining resources and come to me with questions about, I've got this crazy reference, I can't find it, and I really need it for my research. So we have an expertise. Librarians are a very collaborative group. We are worldwide networks of libraries have been working together for decades to provide access to materials, and where one person can't answer a question, I can call on my colleagues and help. But we also, on campus, I think many academic libraries serve a very important role for undergraduates as a sort of community gathering space because the faculty, we have our own offices, we have places to go. Frequently our graduate students have their labs and offices, but the library is that communal sort of public space where they can get together, work on their group projects, that it's outside their dorm rooms, that helps make them feel studious. It helps them sort of indoctrinate them and surround them with that sense that they're an academic and they belong. So I think there are a lot of other almost like intangibles that libraries can bring to make students feel welcome and part of an intellectually vibrant campus community.
So it seems to me that this is kind of the debate that you were talking about. Like some people, they say we don't need a library anymore, or let's say they are very expensive, so we don't have the luxury to keep a library and its resources. On the other side, the librarians and people that they love the library, they are trying to find out an extra way to appeal to the users and say we are more than a collection of books or a collection of specific products. We are also a physical place where you can come, where you feel you belong to a community? Is this the kind of debate, or is it way more thicker, the debate, and complex?
I think you have pretty well summarized it. It's actually not as big a problem as it used to be. There was a time where we had administrators coming forward saying, oh, everything's online, we don't need the library anymore. And I think that, that dream that everything will be online and free, that's the part they forgot to say, actually didn't really come about. I think that might have been the ideal and the hope that everything would be online and we wouldn't need paper anymore. But I think there's a more sophisticated understanding of not only the kinds of services that library provides. Books are our brand, some folks say, but we are a lot more than that. We are the spaces, we are the services we provide, we are the underpinnings to sort of assist and undergird a lot of the research that occurs. So while there are still folks who kind of look at the library and say, oh gosh, I would love to have that space for laboratories, or there are folks who say, gosh, why do we have to have these books? Let's move them out because everything's online. I think a lot of places, they do understand that there's a lot more going on than just those debates, that there are very important roles that libraries can play. In academe, it's partly educational. There's a lot of invested there. To the corporate world, I think academic libraries have a lot to offer, particularly because, and that's a voice that I haven't mentioned much because we don't tend to see them on campus, but academic libraries tend to be the repository for a lot of the core works that, those foundational works, materials written 100 years ago in great bursts of exploration, things that were happening in the 1920s and the 1930s. Corporate and public libraries will not be collecting those and retaining them for the future. But some of those old geological reports are gold in terms of the information that they contain. So we rely a lot on academe to hang on to those because no one else is going to do that. And so corporate folks come to the academic libraries and to some extent the bigger publics to utilize those materials and to know that they're going to be preserved. And when we look at the projects, I mentioned Google before has done a lot. As more things have gone online, as librarians have scanned things, those are library projects. It might say Google Books, but those were library collections that were being scanned and libraries cooperating with Google to try and make sure that people had as good access as they could possibly get to these really valuable older works.
Yes, you say that those materials that you get and you put in common from the public to the private and the corporations, they are gold, but they are more valuable than gold, as valuable as diamonds. I agree on that. And talking about cost, can you tell us an estimate? There are different levels of libraries, from the public library of our neighborhood to the libraries like at Penn State and more. What is the cost to an annual budget to manage a library, roughly speaking, just to understand what we're talking about when we go into the debate?
Let me think. I really have I won't even guess what it would cost to run a public library because they range in size so greatly, and a lot depends on the state and the location. But many public libraries are funded by public tax dollars. Academic libraries, many of us are largely funded by student tuition dollars. A lot of those general funds and fees go to pay for libraries. I can tell you that, Penn State is a very large institution. We're about ranked eighth in North America, so we're pretty big. Our budget is accordingly also pretty large. What I can tell you is that our budget for materials runs in the millions, double digits. I mean, it's millions of dollars going to pay for access to electronic books and e-journals and all kinds of specialty resources, whether it's business information, corporate information, or old research literature and, full text of maps, that kinds of things. In terms of, so I would say our budget is such that, very significant portions go to our collections. In terms of our other operations, wages are a relatively smaller portion of what we do. We've gotten more efficient over time at my library. We're taking up less space. There's more space for people. There's more space for collections than there are space for staff. It's like a lot of other industries. You get efficient as everybody's got a desktop computer or something. So we're still talking millions of dollars to run a large academic library.
I see. And I would like to go into the more important role, as you were highlighting, of the library, that, as we said, it requires an important annual budget. But some things that you don't touch, like the promotion of literacy, is something that is so important for the culture of the people that they live around the library, that I would like you to comment on this, because libraries, fundamentally, they promote literacy of any kind. So I would like to ask you if you can talk about this topic and how do you do it, if you do it proactively, because you do it passively. Just having some books in a room is a passive way to promote literacy. But do you do it also proactively? And if so, what do you do?
Literacy is one of the foundational things about libraries. You're absolutely correct. And I salute our public library colleagues who do fantastic things along those lines. In academe, there are still literacy initiatives going on. And you're correct, just by having the resources available, that encourages people. Research has shown that students who are surrounded by books feel more studious, and they're more likely to pull them off the shelf and actually look at them and feel challenged and energized by them. What I find that's happening more on campus now there are new literacies emerging. Libraries have gone beyond sort of being there for books and teaching about reading. We're more involved in literacies related to media, understanding how to communicate through visual media, being involved in issues related to ethical use of information, being involved in things related to technology literacy. We do programs about financial literacy to make sure our students are well prepared. So I think what I see on my campus are initiatives to a large extent related to moving literacies beyond just about reading and making sure that we're contributing to offering programs for our students about become literate in other ways, whether it's becoming a savvy consumer of information, whether it's becoming literate about financial materials, about health issues. So I think as I look across all the other libraries that I interact with, there's some really exciting things happening on the financial literacy, on the health literacy, on those essential things about how do you be a sophisticated consumer of information in the 21st century.
How do you go to the users, or you just wait the users to come to you?
If we waited for them to come to us, that we would be definitely underperforming. No, it's a challenge because everyone's bombarding students, for example, and faculty, and there's so much communication information coming at all of us every day. I think that we market and promote our materials in a variety of ways. We work through student clubs. We do programs to attract students and faculty and staff to the libraries. We try and just engage people in any way that we can to try and show them that the library is there to assist them. There's value there for the administrative assistant sitting at the front office. There are things that we can do to make that person more effective in their role, or make them assist them in their life outside the day-to-day work that they do. That I'm trying to think. So we do programs, we teach, we do workshops, we get involved in our communities. There's just whatever we can do. I would challenge you to find an activity that to promote libraries that I don't know of someone who hasn't done.
All right. So promoting means good communication. So I understand that you are investing in communicating, in learning how to communicate better. I would like you to give us some hints to us geologists that the geologists, I think, we don't communicate so well. We don't communicate properly, mainly I think because we have this thing that we like so much what we do that we don't care that much about communicating because it just satisfies ourselves. So can you help us with that? How do you learn to communicate better?
That's something I can help you with that. There are a variety of things that have proven effective. Visual materials are interesting to people, and fortunately, geologists, we work with rocks. We're outside. They're doing cool things. You have opportunities to take wonderful photos. And if there's one thing that we have seen through our studies of social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, people love and really react to images. So images of people out there in the field doing fun things, doing the field work, looking at gorgeous rocks or fossils, taking field trips. Images work really well in terms of evoking a sense of, oh, that's cool, or gee, that looked interesting, and it pulls people in. One of the other things that I think science in general is struggling with, but we're trying to help with, is the idea of, it is a literacy, I'm trying to think of which one, there are so many, but it's the idea of storytelling. It's the idea of visual literacy. As scientists, we're trained to sort of get the facts, try not to have an opinion, prepare a hypothesis, and then test it in the field or in the lab. But that doesn't necessarily attract people. I think when we're trying to get people excited by our science and the work that we're doing, it's important to talk about how it affects you emotionally and personally, and the role of storytelling. That's something librarians, it's a foundational thing. A lot of libraries started, a lot of the library training, a lot of the exciting things happened in the public sector, and some of the lessons that we have learned as an academic library, learning from my public library colleagues, is that storytelling is such an effective way of getting interest and getting people excited about the work that you do. And as scientists, we need to do a better job of storytelling, yes, like you're doing with your radio program. It really excites people. And I think what we see on my campus is that we have to put a studio in the library to make it easy for students to do like radio, do some recording so they can do some sort of, what do they call it, public service announcements, so they can practice writing in that style. But also we're encouraging them to actually make videos and get used to the idea of storytelling and telling them about why they're so excited about science.
Yes, Linda. So by any means, invite your students to contact Mini Geology, because we are here for them. We are here trying to show the human side of geology. We're not really talking about technical things. We give some news, obviously, about the things that are going on, but we are interested in the, having this peculiar slant on the geology which highlights the human side of the real people, of those scientists, that they create the news. And so the students, they need to listen to that. And if they want to talk about their story, they're very welcome to write me at minigeology@gmail.com, or they can go themselves and see the many interviews we have done with the video at minigeology.com. This is a YouTube channel. But definitely, if you have a group of students that they want to call in and talk, we can dedicate a full program to them.
Oh, great. I will definitely pass that along.
Yes. And you have described, I think, very well the situation of libraries, and I would say in North America or the Western world. What are the main differences among the libraries in the world? If you have the experience about this, or if you have been in conferences where you compare and contrast the real life of a library in another continent with another budget, or maybe those little villages that we have, for instance, in the middle of the desert here in Texas or over there. Yes, I think that the reality could be very different.
That's very true. This has been on my forefront of my thoughts just lately, but copyright issues, the kinds of things that you can make available online, it's quite different elsewhere. The United States has a very generous and proactive view of information, particularly government information, making it freely available. We are not unique in that, but I think that much of the federal government information was freely available and online very early. So that's one of the changes, but that's more about, sort of the laws and legislation. In terms of the libraries elsewhere, there are a lot of differences. I'm not sure that there are quite so many specialized libraries as like mine. My library, I exist in the college within which I serve, the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences, and I know that is not unique, but I think as I look over to Western Europe, they tend to have more combined central libraries, which, again, is pretty common in the United States. The services, I think services can vary quite a bit. In some libraries, I think like in Croatia, I think the instructional role of librarians is something that's just now starting to grow. I was talking to a librarian at the University of Split, and they still have departmental libraries, sort of like mine, but their idea of the librarian as an instructor, as a teacher of literacies, whether they be visual or media or so on, is a new one. For many libraries elsewhere, the library is a closed place. It's a very traditional place to study. It's very quiet. And if you want access to the books, you have to ask for it at a desk, so that the books are behind lock and key. That's a very different kind of situation as well. I'm trying to think of some of the other places I've been. There certainly have been libraries that are very much like those in the United States. But I guess if there's one thing I've learned is that variety is everywhere. So there are all kinds of variations in terms of services and in terms of the resources. I think we are incredibly fortunate in the United States, the free access to libraries and the resources that we have available. It's pretty spectacular. Similar situations in Britain and in some of the, Germany and the Netherlands as well. But it's quite variable. I guess I would say there's some countries where it's much more of a challenge. The only other thing that I guess I feel qualified to speak about related to other universities is just talking about the experiences of all the the non-U.S. students who come to the United States to study, and we have quite a few. They remark on the fact that it's easy access to information, that they love browsing to see all the wonderful resources that are just there in front of them, and I'm talking physically browsing. So the ability to just happen across an interesting book is sort of new for some of them. But I think the other comment that I would say is it's a reminder to me of the prevalence of English as the sort of language of science. We are so spoiled in the United States that so many of our international students read and write in English quite well, and the reverse is sadly not true. So I think I'll leave it at that, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I also remember when I arrived in here from Italy that I was astonished by the availability of the sources that the professors or the researchers or the corporations they give to you. The way in which you access these resources was very easy. And the second thing that struck me was the availability of the people. The professors, the researchers, everybody was available. They gave you their telephone numbers, their personal cell phone. And these two things, there are two things that maybe, as you say, we are spoiled right now. When you get used to these things, you get easily spoiled. But they're very important. The accessibility to the sources and the availability of the professionals.
That is a good point. I think that reminds me that one of the things that we do take for granted, particularly in the United States, is the speed. The libraries at Penn State and as many other academic institutions in the U.S., we have some 24-hour, 7-day-a-week facilities. We offer reference services through email and such around the clock, and students have come to expect, a 24 to 48-hour turnaround, and because that's what we offer. And it's great, but that's definitely not the norm for every location around the globe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this goes beyond libraries in geology, because right now you can also write an email to your doctor, and your doctor is answering in a few minutes.
Very true. And that is sometimes we have to remind students, particularly as they're starting to get into some very detailed work and they need a dissertation that's coming from, South America somewhere, or, we've had the New Zealand example, and we've had to tell students it just may take a little while to get this, because, and by a little while we say it may take over a month, and that's shocking to them, because most things you can order on Amazon, or you can get things much more quickly. The idea of having to wait a month to get something is quite unusual for them.
Linda, I remind the audience that we are talking with Linda Musser, the head of the Earth and Mineral Sciences Library at the Penn State University. I would like to interact with you now with more pragmatic questions. We geologists, we search for articles, of course, and often we do it now in this Google Scholar. Previously, we used to do it like in GeoRef or something like that. Also, we do it now also in ResearchGate. What do you think about these three different engines? Like GeoRef, let's say the more professional and robust and classic, and the new Google Scholar and ResearchGate. What is the difference in doing a research among these three?
Well, as you said, we still have Google GeoRef, and it's quite a valuable tool for us. I think the differences between Google Scholar, for example, that's the most commonly used one across all fields. We don't really know. We rely a lot on the algorithms. And we almost take it for granted that Google's going to figure out what we're saying, even if we don't use if we do a misspelling, it will still turn it up. But we don't really know how the algorithms work. We don't also know how broadly they are indexing and pulling things from elsewhere. I'm always concerned about the coverage when I'm searching Google Scholar or Google about how much I'm pulling that's not written in English, for example. Because while I know there's a tendency to rely on English and there's a lot there, that there's a lot of really good research that is published in other languages that perhaps wouldn't pop simply because it's not indexed by Google, or simply because it's in a foreign language, or it's using non-Roman script. So that's a challenge. And that's where a tool like GeoRef can be a real aid to researchers, because it's put together by people who are actually indexing things, who have the background in geology, who are seeking out information in all languages to try and say, okay, this is going to be helpful to geologists. So rather than relying on whatever Google can scrape off the internet that just happens to be there, these are folks who are going out to the Geological Survey at Brazil or in Italy or in Australia and saying, we want to get anything related to geology and put it into this index. and make sure it's accessible to geologists. So I appreciate the fact that they're very targeted in what they're seeking, and they're more comprehensive in what they're trying to seek out. So I think there's great advantages to that kind of tool. I'm not as familiar with ResearchGate. I think the challenge there is that, and maybe you know better than I, is that it relies on people to self-deposit and create profiles. And as such, you have to rely on people to voluntarily self-deposit. So a little bit like Google, you don't know how many people are participating or not participating. Perhaps there's an entire research group in Germany that's doing what you're doing, but if they're not in ResearchGate, you might not know about what they're up to. So it's again coming back to being careful about not relying on just one particular source for your information needs, because there's always somebody doing something else that perhaps not going to get picked up by ResearchGate or Academia EDU or Google Scholar. So, and even GeoRef as well, depending on. So it's just a caution for if someone's just after a quick answer or just wants to know one simple thing, then, you know, maybe that's fine. But if you're doing in-depth research, deciding where you're going to drill next, you might want to make sure you have access to all the relevant information, or as best you can, all the information needed.
A very important message to rely on multiple sources. And what about going into the practical questions? How important it is for authors that they write papers to cherry pick the right words for the title and those special keywords that they ask when you write an article, that you can write 5 to 10 of these keywords. How important is that, to cherry pick the right words?
It's very important. It matters a lot, particularly, as I said, with something like a Google or a Bing. It's algorithms, and they have thesauri in the background, and it's really important to try and, if you have the words in your title, it's not a bad idea to repeat them, but if you want to try and make sure you're picking up a variety of keywords so that someone in tangential fields or who perhaps is using a different terminology, it's going to pick it up. So, yes, it's worth asking colleagues, asking somebody else. If look in your bibliography, see what kinds of things and the titles and keywords they're using, and make sure that if they give you a chance to have 10 keywords, use all 10. Do it, even if it means repeating words from your abstract or from your title, because the number of times a particular word appears factors into the weighting algorithm for these services.
I would need a course on this, because nobody taught me these things, and now I feel like I'm an alphabet on many of these things, and I have to find my way the hard way. So, and then more in general, Linda, do we still need to keep journals on paper? What does it happen if we throw them away? Because, the real estate is so expensive, so we don't have space to keep the journals on paper. Do we really still? Is there a reason to keep them? Those kind of magazines.
Well, there are two parts in answer to that question. Earlier on, you asked me about what's the value of having libraries in an academic setting, and one of the things I did not say is that paper allows, when you read a book that's a tangible object, not off of a computer screen, there's a different kind of learning that goes on, and that's an interesting field of study right now, is what kind of learning you get when you're reading something on your Kindle or your device versus reading it in a print form. This perhaps is not as important if you're reading a novel, but when you're trying to read, this is an issue for textbooks and other areas where it's kind of like deep thought, deep thinking comes in. So sometimes the format does matter. So there is sort of some times where paper is a really good thing to have. But to answer your question about the importance of journals and magazines in print or not, I would say a lot depends on your situation. If you're somewhere where you're not having reliable access to electricity or the internet, then you might want to keep your paper around. We've worked with some universities in lesser developed nations where that's an issue. And frankly, there's parts of the United States right now that have been without electricity for quite a while. So if you're in a company doing some kind of work and you think that's going to be a possibility, there's some value to having print around. But for most situations in North America, it's a matter of cost. For example, in an academic setting, we have faculty who have been around for many years, and they have their print runs of journals. And in general, we tell them, if you want to keep them, great, but otherwise feel free to discard them, because the library is providing access to the full text of these online. And we've either purchased access to the back file in perpetuity, or we're leasing access through a subscription. For the general public, again, it's a matter of how convenient you want it to be. You can come to the library, a public library, and get access that way, but otherwise you might have to pay each time if you don't have your print copy or if you don't have a personal password or a subscription. But in general, the simple answer is no. Individuals probably do not need to retain the print copies in their offices unless they find it easier to read that way, because libraries, not only are we providing access to our immediate clientele, but we are parts of various consortia. Preservation is a big part of what libraries do. So while we purchase digital or work with a group like Google or the publishers themselves, like the Elsevier's or the Wileys, to make sure that we get everything scanned, we also have dark archives, warehouses, where we have actual multiple copies of print journals in storage in multiple locations, just in case we have disasters like you experienced there in Houston.
Yeah, definitely. So, Linda, another topic very important that we haven't really touched adequately on it, which is the open access issue. I think this is important because many researchers, writers, they write for free for the publishers that they are publisher for profit, and they give away their copyrights and they allow the publishers to exist, but they don't really get anything back in terms of money. So what is the difference between the open access and the for-profit publishers from your point of view as a librarian?
Open access is, well, that's kind of comparing apples and oranges. We have developed this ecosystem among authors and publishers and libraries that's developed over years. And yes, it's very expensive, and you're absolutely correct that as authors, we give our research away for free to the publishers. We also are reviewers for free frequently, and then we in turn have our libraries at our institutions, or we personally have to buy it back through a subscription. So that's a challenge, and it does seem inequitable. What's happening these days is publishers are aware that there are desires to sort of rebalance the system and are offering various options, usually not completely free. There's usually, well, as an author, you can pay to have your article freely open access. What we see happening more commonly is entirely new journals being formed. Professional societies in some cases are creating entirely new journals that are dedicated to free access to information, and they're underpinning the costs of hosting the website for those journals, so that if a scholar submits there, the editorial board, again, is doing their work for free the way they did for the commercial publishers. But then once something gets published, it's freely available to the world, which is, as a scientist, as someone who's gone to the trouble of writing this article, I want everybody to read my article, so it's great when that works. But this is an evolving system because many professional societies have relied on the revenue that has been they've derived from having their journal published at a commercial publisher.
Linda, we have 30 seconds.
Okay. So I guess I would say that there are options for authors to retain copyright of their resources or to promote open access on institutional repositories. So there are many other ways that authors can move forward.
Thank you very much, Linda. Linda Musser, head of the Earth and Mineral Sciences Library at Penn State University. This is Mini Geology Show. Thank you very much for listening.